It was past midnight in one of the quieter corners of Washington, D.C., where polished sidewalks met shadowed hedges and the occasional flicker of a motion-activated porch light danced across empty driveways. The neighborhood slept soundly, except for one man. Dressed entirely in black, gloves tight, face covered by a cap and mask, he moved with the calculated silence of someone who had done this before. But this wasn't an ordinary burglary. This wasn't about jewelry or cash. Across the street, behind a modest gate and trimmed bushes, stood the two-story brick home of Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in American history. She had recently been in the spotlight for a bold speech defending whistleblowers and transparency in government. It had earned her praise and enemies. Inside, Karoline was fast asleep in the upstairs bedroom. A glass of chamomile tea remained half full on her nightstand, next to a silver cross necklace she always wore in public, but removed before bed. Downstairs, the security system had just completed its scheduled nightly update, a vulnerability the intruder knew about. He slid through the side door with astonishing ease. No alarms, no sound. He didn't ransack the living room. He walked past the TV, the crystal vase, the elegant coat rack. Instead, he went straight for the study, Karoline's private workspace. A locked drawer, second cabinet from the bottom. He knelt, pulled a thin metallic tool from his belt, and began to work. Karoline stirred in her sleep. A flicker of discomfort, then stillness again. But something, instinct or perhaps years of dealing with political games, nudged her awake. Her eyes opened slowly. The silence was too perfect, unnatural. Downstairs, the drawer clicked open. The man's breath caught for a second. Inside wasn't a bundle of cash or government files. It was a leather-bound journal, personal, worn. He flipped through the pages with practiced fingers. Suddenly, a floorboard upstairs creaked. He froze. Karoline had gotten up, and the game had just changed. Karoline stepped into the hallway barefoot, her heart pounding but her mind sharp. She didn't reach for her phone. Yet. Years in politics had taught her something more useful. Awareness before action. Something felt off. Her house was always quiet, but this was sterile silence, heavy, staged. Downstairs, the man paused mid-flip through the journal. The pages weren't policy memos or confidential White House documents. They were handwritten, personal reflections, emotional entries. He recognized the signature. It wasn't Karoline's, it was her father's, Joseph Leavitt, a Vietnam vet, a man whose death had never been entirely resolved. And within the journal, references to sealed military files, suppressed court testimonies, and coded notes tied to a Cold War-era investigation. The kind of story people wanted buried. The burglar suddenly realized he wasn't sent here to steal valuables. He'd been sent to erase a legacy. Karoline, still on the stairs, heard the faintest rustle. Not from the kitchen, from her study. She moved slowly, calculating the angle. If she cut across the hall, the side door was in sight. She might see him. She might catch him. Her breath hitched, and with one cautious step, she peered around the corner. She froze. There he was. A man, average height, dressed in black, crouched at her father's journal, flipping through it like a hunter scanning a map. Their eyes met. It was no longer a burglary. It was a standoff. The man moved quickly, tucking the journal under his arm and heading for the exit. But Karoline didn't flinch. She lunged, not blindly, but strategically. She grabbed the hallway lamp, yanked the cord, and hurled it toward the foyer. The crash was deafening. A warning. A signal. The man stopped for a second. Enough time for Karoline to shout, "I already saw your face, and if you take that, I will find out who sent you." He didn't respond. He bolted, through the side door, gone into the shadows. Karoline locked the door behind him, heart hammering, then ran to the study. The drawer stood open, empty. The journal, gone. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karoline stood frozen for a moment, her eyes locked on the open drawer where the journal had been. She clenched her fists, not from fear, but fury. That journal wasn't just her father's, it was the only physical link she had to a truth no one had dared touch for years. And now someone had broken into her home, bypassed her security, and stolen it with surgical precision. This wasn't a robbery, it was a message. Within minutes, she had pulled her laptop from her desk drawer, fingers flying across the keyboard. She accessed her private home security logs, encrypted, locally stored backups. But something was wrong. The footage for the last 3 hours was corrupted, static, wiped clean. Whoever he was, he had tech knowledge and inside information. That narrowed it down. She wasn't dealing with a street criminal. This was orchestrated. Karoline called the one person she trusted in matters like these, Tom Martinez, a retired federal cyber investigator who had once worked alongside her during her time with the administration's digital threat response team. "You're calling me at 3 a.m., Tom answered groggily. "Either you want to talk about the end of the world, or someone just declared war on you." "Someone broke into my house," she said steady. "They stole my father's journal. I think this was sanctioned." There was silence on the line. Then Tom replied, "I'm coming over. Don't call anyone else yet." Karoline ended the call, paced once, then sat down. Her fingers trembled now, not from fear, but from clarity. The entries in that journal weren't random. Her father had uncovered something that had made enemies. He had written about it cryptically, and she'd never pushed to read it too deeply. Until now. Now it was gone, and someone out there thought she didn't have copies. But she did. Not full ones, but fragments, scans, photos. She kept them in a hidden folder on a backup drive, never shared, never uploaded. As the sun began to rise, casting pale light across her study, Karoline plugged the drive into her laptop and opened the folder. And there it was, a note written in her father's unmistakable handwriting. "If this ever ends up in the wrong hands, look for the name Pinnacle and follow the initials JG." Karoline whispered the name to herself. Pinnacle. It meant nothing yet, but it would, because whoever had taken that journal had just made a very big mistake. Karoline stared at the word Pinnacle, as if it were a riddle waiting to be unlocked. Her father's handwriting was unmistakable, neat, forceful, and underscored with the kind of emphasis only someone who had seen the world's darkest corners would use. She opened the rest of the image files, snapshots she had taken over the years, mostly out of sentiment, not expectation. But now each one was a clue. One page included a map of D.C. with a few key locations marked in red ink. The Department of Veterans Affairs, a shuttered Cold War bunker near Arlington, and, oddly, a nondescript building labeled Pinnacle Systems. It looked like a bland office park on paper, but something about the way it was circled twice with an arrow pointing to the rooftop made her gut twist. There was also a date, March 6, 1991, the day after Operation Desert Storm officially ended, and below that, the initials. J.G. Karoline whispered the initials aloud. J.G., J. Griffin, J. Gallagher, J. Garland? Then her mind stopped. Judge Garland? That couldn't be coincidence. Merrick Garland was a young prosecutor at the time, and now he was the Attorney General. Her heart skipped. Could her father have been investigating something buried deep in the Department of Justice? Something that Garland had touched or covered? Before her thoughts spiraled, Tom Martinez arrived, unshaven but alert. He dropped his go bag on the table and opened his laptop. "Whoever wiped your cameras knew your system well," he said as he pulled files from her corrupted drives. This wasn't a thug. This was intelligence-grade tampering, probably government-trained. Karoline didn't flinch. "Then we follow the only trail they didn't erase." She showed him the image of her father's journal entry, including the name Pinnacle, and the initials J.G. Tom's eyes narrowed. "Pinnacle Systems," he muttered. "They used to be a defense subcontractor. Small, quiet, but well-connected. Rumors say they worked on a classified psychological profiling program for the Pentagon in the late 80s, something about manipulating enemy decision-making during Cold War diplomacy." Karoline leaned forward. My father wrote that war is never just bombs and blood. It's also blackmail and silence. Tom looked at her. And you think that's what happened to him? She nodded. I don't just think it. I know it now, and whoever's scared of that journal is scared of what he knew. The air grew heavy with implication. Outside, the street was quiet. But inside, Karoline's house had become the war room of a daughter on a mission. Because this wasn't just about theft, this was about justice, long overdue. The next morning, Karoline stood across the street from a nondescript gray building in Arlington, the last known address of Pinnacle Systems. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Windows were dust-streaked. The sign was missing a few letters. But her instincts screamed otherwise. This was no dead relic, it was a dormant trap. Tom stayed in the car, watching the perimeter through a telephoto lens. You sure about this? He asked through the earpiece. We're not exactly walking into a coffee shop. Karoline pressed a small recorder into the pocket of her blazer and adjusted the collar of her white trench coat. The small silver cross necklace, her father's last gift, rested beneath her scarf. She walked with intention, eyes scanning every corner. If someone wanted her silence, they'd find she wasn't so easily muted. Inside the building, the lobby smelled of mildew and secrets. Dust coated the reception desk, but there were recent footprints on the marble floor, fresh coffee stains by the elevator. The lights flickered on, automatically. So much for abandoned. She walked past the lobby cameras, which she knew weren't for show. As the elevator doors slid open, her pulse quickened. She stepped inside, pressed the only lit button, sub-level 1, and took a breath. The door closed, and for 12 seconds, nothing but humming silence. Then the lights flickered. The elevator didn't move. Her earpiece buzzed. Karoline, the feed's cutting. Can you hear me? Static. Then the doors slid back open, not to a hallway, but to a dark room. And in the center, under a narrow spotlight, stood a table with a single object on it. A manila folder. She stepped out cautiously. The room was cold, the air humming with electricity. The folder bore no label, no insignia. Just a red wax seal. Karoline opened it with steady fingers, revealing a collection of photos, grainy surveillance shots, some decades old. But one photo made her stomach twist. It showed her father, sitting at a bar in 1991, across from a man whose face was partially blurred, except for the lapel pin. Department of Justice. Tucked inside the folder was a slip of paper, handwritten in ink that matched her father's journal. They made me choose silence or survival. I chose silence. For you. But I kept the truth. If you're reading this, they came for it. A sharp noise made her spin. Someone was standing in the doorway now, silhouetted. I hoped you'd follow the trail, the figure said. A man's voice, aged but calm. But you should have left it buried. Karoline didn't blink. Who are you? The man stepped forward just enough to show his face. And for the first time in years, Karoline recognized him. Not from TV, from her childhood, from her father's funeral. The man stepped into the dim light, his eyes locked on Karoline's like a vault about to open. He looked older now, grayer, slower, but his presence still cut through the air like a knife through silk. He wore a federal badge on his belt, though he didn't reach for it. He didn't need to. You don't remember me, he said. But I remember you. You held your father's hand like it was an anchor at his funeral. I watched from the back. I wasn't allowed to come closer. Karoline narrowed her eyes. Why? Because if anyone saw me, they'd ask questions. Questions I wasn't ready to answer. She took a step forward, clutching the folder in her hand. Then start answering them. Why was my father being watched? Who were you to him? He sighed, almost regretfully. We were part of the same operation, a classified one. Early 90s. A task force built to investigate corruption within the highest levels of the judiciary and corporate defense. He got too close to something we weren't supposed to find. Karoline's voice dropped. Like Pinnacle Systems. Exactly. They weren't just a security firm. They were laundering political secrets, recordings, emails, leverage. Your father stumbled across their ghost contracts, deals with three-letter agencies, off-the-books tribunals, blackmail files. Her grip on the folder tightened. And you let them silence him. No, he said sharply. I warned him. I told him to disappear. And he did, for a while. But he kept breadcrumbs. For you. Karoline's heart thudded. Why me? Because he knew you wouldn't let it go. He always said, my daughter doesn't just speak. She listens. She sees patterns in chaos. The man pointed to the folder. He left those clues for you. But they're dangerous, Karoline. That audio file you found? That was just one piece. If you release the rest, they won't come after just you. They already have, she said, her voice firm. You don't get to warn me off now. Not when they broke into my house. Not when I know they were behind my father's disappearance. He nodded slowly, then reached into his coat pocket. Not for a gun, but for a flash drive. This is what your father died protecting. The full archive, recordings, emails, identities. It connects judges, journalists, even sitting cabinet members. Karoline took it, her fingers shaking slightly. Why now? Because it's already in motion. You exposed the first layer when you aired that clip. The others are running scared. You have one shot to finish this before they bury the story and everyone involved. She looked down at the flash drive, then back up. Then I'll finish it. But I won't do it alone. I know, the man said. And that's why I came. From behind him, another figure appeared. Tom. Karoline exhaled in surprise. You're working with him? Tom gave a half smile. Not until 10 minutes ago, but he convinced me, and I know you're not done. She looked at both of them, then at the drive. Let's burn it down. Karoline sat in the low-lit room, the flash drive now loaded into her secure laptop. Every click echoed in the quiet, as if the machine itself knew what she was about to uncover would rewrite everything. On the screen bloomed dozens of files. Voice recordings, scanned letters, confidential memos, and a folder marked simply, Judiciary Chain, Priority Red. Tom stood behind her, arms crossed. These are official transcripts. Look at the headers. DOJ, DHS. Even internal White House memos. These aren't just leaks. This is the skeleton of something rotten. Karoline opened one audio file labeled Harlan Comp Call 23. The sound came through faintly at first, then sharpened. Judge Harlan, an acting federal judge speaking in hushed tones to a man named Victor Crest. The footage needs to disappear before Friday. Bondi's too close. If this leaks, it ties back to Roberts. You understand? Crest's reply was cold. Then we'd deal with it the way we always have. Karoline paused the playback, chills crawling up her arms. They were covering for each other. They knew Pam was about to go public with something. Tom leaned over. And Roberts. If he was involved, a second voice cut through the speakers. She's the wild card. That Leavitt girl. Pull her security file. If she's anywhere near this, we lock her out. Karoline's jaw clenched. They were watching me. The older man, whom Karoline had mentally labeled as the Watcher, nodded grimly. Since the day your father vanished, you were always a threat because he trained you to see the system from the inside. They thought you'd go into journalism. You surprised them by stepping into the White House. Karoline's fingers danced across the keyboard, scanning documents at a relentless pace. She found one titled Asset 714B, Potential Interference Profile. Her photo was attached. Under it, Projected Response, Unmanageable if provoked. Do not engage directly. Unmanageable? She muttered, half a laugh, half a warning. That's what they think of me? Tom smirked. They're not wrong. A knock came at the door. All three froze. The Watcher moved first, drawing a compact sidearm and signaling Karoline to stay behind the desk. But it wasn't an attacker. A courier slipped a manila envelope under the door and walked off without a word. Karoline picked it up. Inside was a single USB and a note. They're trying to erase this from the cloud. Hard copy only, use it before midnight. The USB contained a final video, a secret courtroom deposition from a whistleblower testifying that the Pinnacle Loop operation not only manipulated court outcomes, but also edited media coverage post-trial, ensuring public perception always leaned in their favor. She sat back, breath catching. "This is enough," she whispered. "This isn't just about my father, or even Bondi. This is about the country." The watcher looked at her. "Then you know what has to come next." Karoline nodded, eyes burning with resolve. "A press conference. Not just a leak, full exposure. If they're going to silence me, they'll have to do it live, with every camera rolling." Tom stared at her. "Are you ready for that kind of war?" Karoline smiled faintly. "It already started when they broke into my house. Now I'm writing the ending." By morning, the Capitol was already humming with electricity. Rumors swirled like a coming storm, something about a press conference, a whistleblower, and a secret recording that could bring down people once thought untouchable. But no one knew for sure. No one except Karoline Leavitt. She stood at the podium of the briefing hall, dressed in a simple dark green blazer that gleamed under the lights. Her silver necklace rested against her collarbone, catching the camera's focus like a moral compass forged in steel. Pam Bondi stood just behind her, calm but unshakably firm, her presence a silent confirmation that what was about to be said would not be theater, but truth. News crews filled the room. Every major network, every fringe blog, every political commentator with a camera was watching. Karoline took a breath. The room fell silent. "Before I begin," she said, "I want to remind you all of something simple. Truth doesn't need permission. It just needs courage." She paused and pressed a small remote. The large screen behind her flickered on. The audio began to play. Judge Merrick Garland's voice, unmistakable. "She has access to more than she should. If we can't discredit her legally, we isolate her. Use the break-in as cover, make it look like a random job." Gasps rippled through the room. Another clip. "Bondi's file needs to vanish. I don't care who we have to silence." Then the whistleblower's deposition appeared on screen. Face blurred, voice altered but crystal clear. They used Pinnacle Loop to alter trial outcomes. Judges, clerks, even reporters were fed approved scripts. Karoline turned back to the crowd, her eyes steady. "They said there was no recording, that it was fiction, that I was dramatizing a harmless burglary. But now you've heard it, unchanged, unedited." Pam stepped forward. "These are not political games. These are legal crimes committed at the highest levels of our justice system." Reporters shouted questions all at once. "When did you find this? Why wait until now? Do you fear retaliation?" Karoline raised a hand, silencing the room. "Of course I do, but fear is a luxury I can't afford. Because if I stay quiet, what happens tomorrow? Whose house gets broken into next? Which truth-teller disappears?" Another clip began to play, this time a video from the security camera at her home. A masked figure inside, rifling through documents, pausing at one folder labeled Bondi Trial Chain, then vanishing. Karoline narrowed her eyes. He wasn't looking for jewelry. He wasn't after cash. He was after evidence. Cameras flashed like lightning. Social media, already flooded with hashtags like Leavitt Leaks and Garlandgate, now surged with fire. Networks were forced to air her words in real time. No station dared cut away. And then, with perfect timing, Karoline delivered her closing line. "I don't care if you're a friend or a rival. If you twist justice, I will stand against you. Even if you wear a robe, even if you carry the title Attorney General, you broke the trust of the people. And now, you will answer to them." The room didn't erupt in applause. It fell into stunned silence, because everyone knew something irreversible had just begun. By mid-afternoon, calls were flooding every major office in Washington. Congress members, legal analysts, and media executives were scrambling, not just to confirm the audio's authenticity, but to calculate its fallout. The Justice Department issued a vague statement calling the recording edited and misleading. But even their press secretary looked pale and unsure on camera. They weren't in control anymore. Karoline Leavitt was. Inside the White House, Karoline sat in a side room just off the main hall, a cup of untouched black coffee in front of her. Her phone buzzed every few seconds with updates from aides, legal advisors, and security teams. Across from her sat Pam Bondi, flipping through a folder of legal precedents, her brow furrowed. "They're going to call this political," Pam muttered, not looking up. Karoline didn't hesitate. "Then let them. They crossed a line. I'm not letting them bury it just because it's inconvenient." There was steel in her voice, not arrogance, but clarity. A clarity that only comes from having seen how the machine works, and deciding to jam the gears anyway. On Capitol Hill, Senator Blaine Carpenter, a moderate Democrat, stepped out in front of a wall of reporters. "If this tape is real," he said, choosing every word like a man walking on glass, "we are facing something larger than partisan politics. This is a threat to judicial integrity." Meanwhile, Garland's office was in crisis. Internal emails leaked later showed frantic messages among senior staff. "Scrub anything related to Bondi. Check all correspondence from last March. Has anyone talked to the FBI yet?" Karoline knew the storm was only beginning. Back in her office, an aide stepped in. "Ma'am, CNN wants you on air tonight, and Fox is requesting a one-on-one with Hannity." Karoline shook her head. "No shows, no interviews. If I speak again, it'll be from the Senate floor." Pam looked up, surprised. "The Senate? Karoline, that's a battlefield, and you're not exactly surrounded by allies there." Karoline's response came without hesitation. "Exactly, that's where it needs to be said." Later that night, she reviewed the footage of the press conference again, pausing at the moment where she played the final clip of the break-in. Her eyes scanned the frame, watching as the intruder moved not like a desperate thief, but like someone following a plan. Calm, surgical, professional. "This wasn't about me," she murmured. "This was about stopping the truth." Pam glanced over. They failed. Karoline stood and walked to the window. Below, DC traffic buzzed like nothing had happened. But she knew better. Something had shifted. And for once, the usual power brokers weren't the ones calling the shots. The only question now, how far would they go to take it back? 2 days later, Karoline Leavitt stood at the podium inside the Senate chamber, dressed in a sharp black suit with the silver cross at her collar glinting under the dome lights. Cameras from every major network were locked onto her, and dozens of senators, aides, and visitors sat in pin-drop silence. It wasn't just another floor speech. Everyone knew it. This was confrontation dressed in decorum, a legal and moral reckoning disguised as a debate. "I did not come here to play politics," Karoline began, her voice steady, slow, and surgical. "I came here because I believe this chamber still holds meaning, even when some try to rot it from within." Gasps rose. A few murmurs buzzed in the back rows. But she pressed forward, her notes untouched. "Chief Justice Merrick Garland is not here to defend himself, and I won't speak as if he were convicted. But I will speak to what we now know." She raised a hand, gesturing to the screen behind her. The Senate's media team, coordinated by her own staff, cued the audio clip again. Merrick Garland's voice echoed through the chamber. "She'll back off for the right price. Send someone. Make it look like robbery." A wave of tension swept across the room like static. Some senators looked away. Others leaned forward in disbelief. A few, to Karoline's quiet satisfaction, nodded. "This was not about money," she continued, walking slowly across the chamber floor. "It was about silencing someone who was getting too close. Silencing me, and silencing the American people's right to know the truth." Her voice rose, not in volume, but in conviction. Pam Bondi was targeted not for breaking the law, but for questioning those who manipulate it. I was targeted not because I'm dangerous, but because I refuse to look away. The climax of her speech landed with the force of a gavel. And if we, the people trusted to uphold this republic, do not take this seriously, if we dismiss this as a headline or let partisanship blind us, then what are we defending, if not ourselves? There was no applause, not in the Senate. But the silence that followed spoke louder than cheers. That night, across America, millions watched the full speech. Social media exploded with support. Even some of Garland's longtime defenders began to hedge, releasing carefully worded statements like, "If the facts are accurate, this must be examined." And in a quiet corner office, Merrick Garland sat watching the replay, alone, pale, and motionless. On his desk, a resignation letter lay unsigned. His power, once unshakable, now trembled under the weight of one woman's refusal to stay quiet. Karoline didn't declare victory that night. She didn't need to. She walked off the Senate floor with her head held high, her cross catching one last beam of light. The truth had spoken, and this time, the world listened. And that, my friends, is what happens when truth meets power and refuses to back down. Karoline Leavitt didn't seek revenge. She didn't shout or threaten or crumble. She simply stood her ground, armed with evidence, principle, and the courage to face corruption head-on. They thought they could scare her. They thought they could buy her silence. But instead, she uncovered everything. Sometimes it takes just one voice to expose the rot. One cross at the collar, one unwavering stare across the aisle, and suddenly everything changes. Thank you for watching. And remember, no matter how dark it gets, the truth always finds a way to speak.